Welcome to Swine Chats, Pig Chats, all of the chats. We're so excited that you're here to talk pigs with us today. My name is Brittany Sweeney. I am the communications manager at the Livestock Conservancy, and I have some very special guests with me here today. I'm excited to welcome Charlene Couch and Mark Knauer. Thanks for joining us. We're so glad y'all are here.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Well, Happy New Year, everyone. I'm glad you're here to celebrate 2023. Kick it off with some pig chats. Charlene, do you want to do a quick intro?
Yeah, let me introduce, please, Dr. Mark Knauer. Dr. Knauer is a Swine Extension Specialist at North Carolina State University, which is also my alma mater. Mark uses research and educational opportunities and events to help advance the profitability of swine production. And a lot of it happens not just on large farms, but on small farms. One of the things that I appreciate about Mark is that he contributed a chapter to the Heritage Swine Guide that we published. And there's some great information in there if you guys want to follow up on that. Brittany, do you want to give us the rules of the road?
Absolutely. Well, we are super excited to talk about genetics and selecting breeding stock and all the fun stuff today. But before we get started, I just want to say a quick thank you to ManaPro for sponsoring today's chat. So thank you very much. I'm going to play a quick 1-minute little commercial for them. So stick around and we'll be right back.
Champions, colleagues,
roommates,
and personal trainers.
Whatever role they play,
they're an important part of our lives.
In their quiet way,
and their not so quiet way.
They keep us young.
On our feet,
on the go.
They pull us back to nature
and push us toward the next adventure.
And as much as we count on them,
they count on us all the more.
To nurture their lives
with the same commitment.
To protecting them,
helping them grow
and thrive.
Treating them
as well as they treat us. By giving them a little more of our lives. Because no matter what role they play, out here
or in here,
we're here to make their lives the best they can be.
ManaPro, nurturing life.
All right, welcome back, and thanks again to ManaPro for featuring heritage breeds in that beautiful commercial. We saw some Michon pigs, which I absolutely love. Yes, anyway, I just get so excited about heritage breeds and talking about all these amazing things today. So Charlene, where do you want to kick things off?
Well, first, I guess let's let Mark introduce himself right quick and maybe tell us a little bit about what he wants to discuss today. I think it's something that's super useful to every pig breeder out there listening, and also to every other livestock breeder out there listening. So, Mark, you want to take it away?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Mark Knauer, Swine Extension Specialist here at NC State. I grew up in southern Wisconsin and went to school in Iowa State and North Carolina State, and have circled back here to Extension Specialist here at North Carolina State, where I work with large and small producers alike in the state, conducting education and research programs. Today, we want to talk a little bit about inbreeding and some other factors in relation to genetic conservation. And if you guys have questions along the way, I'd be happy to try and answer any questions you guys have.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Yes. Everybody type your questions as a comment on Facebook or YouTube or however you're watching today, and we will try and get to those as soon as we can.
Mm-hmm. As you kick it off, Mark, can you remind everybody why genetic diversity is important, since you're going to talk about inbreeding?
Well, diversity is important because if we don't maintain diversity, we rack up inbreeding. If our inbreeding gets too high, it gets hard for animals to reproduce. And of course, animals have to reproduce so the breed can keep in continuance. So that's why maintaining genetic diversity is very important, just so we're able to maintain our different heritage genetic lines.
Thanks. Right. Brittany, are you ready to share? Yeah, there we go.
Slides.
All right, very good. Next slide, please, Brittany. So yes, as we talked, genetic diversity and inbreeding are inversely related. So we want high genetic diversity, so we want low inbreeding coefficients. And in talking with Charlene before visiting with you all today, she mentioned that from your registries, you may be getting inbreeding coefficients on each animal. Well, it's very important to look at the inbreeding coefficient of a planned mating or of two animals when they're combined. So two different animals may have a 0.2 inbreeding coefficient, but if you put those two together, it might not be a 0.2 or 0.4. It could be lower than that. So it's important to look at the paired mating, your inbreeding coefficients for paired matings. So what is inbreeding? It's the mating together of animals that are related by ancestry. Next slide, please, Brittany. Here's some old data, but it still likely holds true today. This is from a study done back in the 1960s. It would have been, and they looked at the impact of inbreeding on reproduction. So reproduction is there on the side axis in litter size, in inbreeding of the dam across the bottom axis. And this shows as you increase inbreeding that you're going to impair generally reproduction, or any traits that are lowly heritable are going to be more impacted by inbreeding. Next slide, please, Brittany. Another slide from the same study, and I think this still holds today, that inbreeding, it's unfavorable for litter size, but it's also going to be unfavorable for survival traits, which would also be lowly heritable. So again, just to maintain the continuancy of these very unique heritage breeds we have, we want to make sure we keep our inbreeding of our paired matings down. Next slide, please, Brittany. So as we talked, reproduction is just getting females bred and continuing the population can be a challenge. And high levels of inbreeding can also improve and can impact growth rate. So as we increase inbreeding, growth rate potentially reduces as well, which is going to reduce the amount of pounds we can create in a certain amount of time. Next slide, please, Brittany. And if you've had high inbreeding in your population, or if you've been on other farms that had high inbreeding can also uncover some genetic defects. So I've been in different populations and multiplication in larger type herds where, maybe they didn't track which boars were getting mated to which sows as good as they should have, and you can end up with some genetic defects. Here's an example of a hermaphrodite. Next slide, please, Brittany. Other ones I've seen where inbreeding appeared to be an issue was pigs with more than 4 feet. That really creeped me out the first time I saw it, and I think it would still creep me out today. Scrotal ruptures or scrotal hernias can also be a problem when you have high inbreeding and atresia ani. So there's different genetic effects that can arise when inbreeding increases. Next slide, please. So here's the equation to calculate inbreeding. I don't expect anybody to be able to memorize this or repeat this at the end, but this is just to show you that there actually is an equation, and there's components to that equation that we'll talk about today as far as strategies to reduce the rate of inbreeding. So if we look at our equation here, F is just the rate of inbreeding or inbreeding coefficient, and the delta F would be the change. So the delta F is equal to half of the effective population size. And you're like, well, what is effective population size? We'll talk about that in a little bit to try to break it down as far as what effective population size is. And then T is the generation interval. And we'll break that down a little bit here as we go to help you better understand what generation interval is and how you can use that as to your advantage to reduce inbreeding. Next slide, please, Brittany. So avoiding of close relatives. So in order of importance, we definitely don't want to breed parents to offspring. That's going to really increase our inbreeding at a rapid pace. We also want to avoid breeding full siblings, brothers to sisters, and We also want to avoid breeding half siblings, animals that may be out of the same sire or same dam. So by avoiding that, that will help us from accumulating inbreeding over time. Next slide, please, Brittany. So what do I mean by population size? So effective population size, there's equations for it, but let's see, next slide, please, Brittany. Basically, to enhance your population size, your limiting factor is going to be how many males you're using in your herd. So if you have 5 or 10 sows, if instead of using one male, if you can use 2 or 3 males, 2 or 3 boars instead of just one boar, that's going to really help you reduce your rate of inbreeding. So ideally, if you had 10 sows, you would mate them to 10 different boars, and that would be the ideal case for reducing inbreeding, but we know that might not be practical. So even if you can just go from using one boar to 2 or 3 boars, that's going to really help how fast inbreeding, reduce how fast inbreeding accumulates in your population or your herd. Next slide, please. Bringing in outside genetics, an excellent way to reduce the accumulation of inbreeding in your herd. So easier said than done, but with we now have where a lot of people are able to collect semen, and you can ship semen overnight and use that semen the next day to breed your females. So next slide, please. So yeah, there's different ways to bring in outside genetics. You can either bring in semen or you can bring in live animals. And when I was growing up, I grew up on about a 50 sow pure line farm in southern Wisconsin. And it seemed like half the time the boar was too big or too small to breed the intended female. So dad was trying to breed this small boar to this huge sow or this huge boar to this gilt. And I can't tell you how many hours we were out there trying to get them connected. I mean, just unbelievable. But if I knew now what I knew then, it would have been substantially easier. So there are strategies to help out when your boar and your female don't match up in size. If your boar is too small, that's pretty easy. You can just collect the semen off the sow in heat and put that semen right in a bottle and inseminate her right back. You don't have to have much handling equipment. You do have to figure out how to collect a boar, period, which is a little bit challenging because when he's thrusting his penis out, your intuition may be to help pull it out, but you actually want to do the opposite. You actually want to form a corkscrew with your hand, and you actually want to push against him a little bit. So there is a little bit of technique to learn there when you're collecting a boar off a sow. If the boar is too big, you can potentially train that boar to mount a dummy like they do in AI studs, or you could use a breeding crate. I haven't seen very many breeding crates, but it's a pretty awesome idea if you could ever get one built. So next slide, please. And here's just an example of some different dummies that are available, and you could make one at home for materials potentially laying around your barn. So it's requires some patience to train a boar to jump a dummy, but it can be done. So I've been surprised. I've even as recently as this past year or two, I've trained some young boars to jump dummies, and that's typically what they'll do in AI studs is they'll train boars to jump the dummies. Next slide, please. Here's an example of a breeding crate I was able to find online, and there are some other examples. A crate that can hold the sow in one place but still allow the boar to jump on her. And this can be advantageous as far as you can help you if the boar is too big or too small relative to your sow size, and take some weight off her. So next slide, please. Luckily, in the last several years, here at NC State, we've put together a series of videos that would potentially be helpful in this AI process. Here are two videos that come from the top there. You can see it's YouTube backslash at NC State Swine Extension 7030 slash backslash videos. Here's two videos we have circled: dummy training and collecting the boar, and even simply constructing a boar semen collection pen. So short videos that are potentially helpful for people that want to collect their own boars or train their boars to be collected. Next slide, please. So we talked about bringing in outside genetics from boars or semen. Either one of those options is good at reducing your rate of inbreeding. Next slide, please. We also have two other videos on the website there. We got about 50 videos on there now, and these are some of our early ones, so you'll have to scroll down on the page when you get there. Swine artificial insemination, and then boar semen extension and handling. Both short videos that should help you if you're first time looking to artificially inseminate any of your females, gilts or sows. Next slide, please. So this developing a grade up program, that's depending on your breed registry, that may or may not be acceptable. When I was a kid, we were heavily involved in purebreds, and I would have thought a grade up program was maybe like the worst thing ever. But now that I'm older and a trained geneticist, I could see where a grade up program potentially has benefit if it means the survival of a breed. So basically what a breed up program is you'll bring in an outside breed. There you can see on the left, you got your heritage breed, and then maybe you bring in a landrace. And so you got a half landrace, but then you can continue to breed the females from that animal back to your heritage breed. And pretty soon you're at 7/8 or 15/16 the heritage breed, and you're able to help reduce inbreeding that way and keep the population going. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk about potentially an easy way to reduce inbreeding is to lengthen the generation interval. And so, you don't have to train your animals. You don't have to bring in outside semen or outside pigs to do this. You can already do this within your existing population by just lengthening the generation interval. So what do I mean by lengthening the generation interval? Next slide, please, Brittany. So again, another simple equation. Don't be intimidated by equations. There will be no test at the end, but it's just to help you get the idea of the concepts and that there are actual data and numbers behind some of these things that you'll see. So your generation interval for your males and females, M is males, F is females. It's just you take their age and you divide it by 2, and you're going to have your generation interval. Next slide, please. So strategies to lengthen the generation interval. So don't keep any offspring out of gilt litters. So this will do two things. Number one, it's going to reduce your rate of inbreeding. And number two, generally first-time mothers aren't quite as productive as multi-parous mothers. And there will be some positive maternal effects from that multi-parity sow on those animals. So try not to keep offspring out of gilt litters if you can, and then keep offspring out of old boars and old sows. So I think in this next slide, we'll show you an example of how that can greatly reduce your rate of inbreeding. Next slide, please. So try and keep offspring out of older parents if you can, or your replacements out of older parents. So in scenario 1, if you had a somewhat young boar, 2 years of age, and you had a first litter gilt that farrowed at 1 year of age, your generation interval would be 1.5, with just the average age of your boar and your sow when those pigs are born. Scenario 2, say you use an older boar, 5-year-old boar, an older sow that's 4 years old, your average generation interval the average age of those when your pigs are born be 4.5 years. So if we compare 4.5 to 1.5, you divide 4.5 by 1.5, you get 3. So your rate of inbreeding is going to be 3 times less in scenario 2 than scenario 1. So by using keeping your replacements out of older animals can help reduce your rate of inbreeding. Next slide, please. So strategies to maintain genetic diversity. We've talked about avoiding mating close relatives can increase your population size. So avoid mating of close relatives. Don't breed sires to offspring. Don't breed full sibs. Don't breed half sibs. Increase your population size. Increase your effective population size by bringing in outside animals. Increase the number of males used for breeding. So if you have 10 sows, instead of using just one boar, if you can use 2 or 3 boars or even more, that can help keep your inbreeding down. We talked about bringing in outside genetics, whether that be through live animals or semen. Develop a grade up program depending on how acceptable that is to your particular breed registry. And then even doing simple things like lengthening the generation interval, not keeping replacement females out of first parity gilts. Try to keep your replacement animals out of older boars and older sows to help reduce your rate of inbreeding. Next slide, please. So with that, a big thank you to everybody out there raising heritage breeds. I know it's not easy. It can be a challenge at times, but coming from a person that's been around pigs for 40 plus years, like what you guys are doing is super important. And I super appreciate what you guys are doing. Genetic diversity, in my opinion, is very important. And so if you're a heritage breeder out there today, I think you definitely deserve a pat on the back. And I greatly thank you. Next slide, please. Again, here's just the link to all the different videos we have that I think could be of help in if you want to start collecting animals and using your own AI. Also have a nice little video in there on a lot of times niche producers might not have scales. And so we developed a strategy where if you just get a piece of plastic tubing, the tubing is $1 or $2 at Lowe's or Home Depot. You can use that as a scale to estimate pig weight as well. Next slide, please. And with that, I greatly thank you guys for your time and be happy to entertain any questions that you may have. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Mark. It's a good point.
Absolutely. Yeah, so if anybody has questions, go ahead and type them in. It looks like we've got one now. Hi, Kayla. Thanks for joining us today. Kayla says, Mark, do you offer consultations for breed registries and associations?
So I have worked with the National Swine Registry, which consists of Hamps, Yorks, Landrace, and Durocs. But I haven't visited with many heritage registries lately, but I would be happy to try and help them out any way I can.
Awesome.
So either they can contact me or you guys can connect us or whatever. I'm open to helping everybody. So.
Well,
if I can.
We'd be glad to help you connect with any other folks out there who have seen this video and who may have questions about it or about the YouTube videos. That's a wonderful resource.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I had a question, Mark. This is something that comes up a lot for us is how do you balance the importance of diversity with the importance of selection, because selection, of course, is going to increase or decrease diversity a bit. So how would you suggest breeders think about that?
That's a really good question and a tough question, right? Because there's a lot of dependent factors. So generally, I think of what we're seeing a little bit in some commercial populations, but may also be present in niche populations. As if I've always hated to use growth rate as a good selection tool, but I think in either commercial or niche populations, as long as growth is acceptable, you can relate that to health a little bit, right? Like that animal is able to thrive and survive in the environment that it's being reared. So if you have a litter of pigs, if you're going to weigh them at 250 pounds or 180 days of age, and if you got like a 75-pound difference, like that's big, right? But if you only got a 5-pound difference, that doesn't really mean much. But then, of course, you always want to look at feet and legs too. But then a lot of these niche pigs are reared on, oftentimes they may be reared on dirt, which is more forgiving on feet and legs. So, no, that is a tough question. I guess I would look at growth rate a little bit as far as related to health. But if you just got a 5 or 10 or 25-pound difference between litter mates, I wouldn't get too carried away on that. If you got like a 75-pound difference between litter mates, that's maybe something you'd want to consider. But it's a balance, right? And then again, we're talking about reducing inbreeding. So look at the inbreeding coefficients of your planned matings. And if it's 0.2 difference, that's pretty big, or 0.4 difference, that's real big. But if the inbreeding coefficient difference is only 0.02, that's not as big. So it's hard to give a blanket recommendation, but you just kind of got to think about some of these things and just try to balance them the best you can.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. That is a really hard question, and because of that, it does come up again and again and again among our breeders. Yeah, good stuff. How about in terms of selecting breeding stock? You mentioned growth rate, or growth, I guess, as a decent measure of health. What are some of the others that are important to look at when people are picking out which brood stock to move forward with?
Yeah, so as I said, it's got to be extreme differences in growth, but before I'd get too worried about growth. But feet and legs are always important. You want pigs that are mobile, but then again, the dirt gives a little bit of forgiveness on the feet and legs. And we do have a feet and leg video, YouTube video on our website. I didn't show, but it's about 10 minutes in length. And I think it's definitely worth your time, because in that video, we talk about different feet and leg traits, and to the average person, they're like, well, where the heck is that on the pig? But what we do in that 10-minute video is we have still images where we draw in the angle that we're talking about and have an arrow pointing to it and label it. And then we go from the still image to a video to show how that pig moves better. So I think if you got 10 minutes and you're worried about feet and legs, that's a pretty good resource to go check it out. So a little bit concerned about growth, but maybe not too much. Get familiar with feet and legs, what good feet and legs look like. And then muscling is always good to have, depending on your market, because muscling is going to be, if you got more lean muscle, that's going to be more efficient to convert than if you have a more fat type pig. And that's going to, so.
Okay. Thank you.
I think we have a couple more questions. Let's see. Hi, Lou Dennis. Thanks for joining us today. We're glad you're here. Kayla says, if a litter has a pig with cryptorchid or hernia, should all piglets in the litter be made feeders instead of breeders?
Boy, that's a good question.
A tough audience, isn't it?
And good news, bad news is a lot of these answer, it depends, right? So if that's like the survival of the breed, no, you're not going to call all the litter mates. So the cryptorchid and the hernia, that's interesting. I've read some interesting things on that, as far as you can have two lines that don't have hardly any, but then when you cross the lines, there's all kinds of hernias. So yeah, that's a real good question. I mean, if you got a ton of animals, yeah, you can probably get away with culling that litter, but if you don't have a ton of animals, you know, you probably don't want to throw away the whole litter, but that's a very good question.
Thanks, Kayla. Let's see. Hi, Verna. Thanks for joining us today. Verna says, we just bought our property and want to raise eventually the mulefoot. It seems, and it's not something I had thought about, but if there is limited numbers when dealing with some critical or rare breeds, how would one begin and what would the focus be?
Mulefoot, those are super cool. I wouldn't mind getting some of those. Those are kind of cool.
And tasty, Mark. They're very
Tasty. I've never tasted a mulefoot.
Oh, yes.
So,
Good idea, Verna.
yeah, mulefoot, I think, is pretty darn rare. And again, it's just, I think a lot back to what we talked about today is if there's not many mulefoot, it's a maintaining diversity, right? So you can keep the population going. So it's, getting an inventory of all the outside genetics out there and trying not to keep gilts out of the first litter females, trying to keep gilts out of the older sows and use older boars and not use just one boar, use multiple boars. If you got, so I would say genetic diversity is where I would begin. And then if you haven't raised pigs before, it's just basic learning the blocking and tackling of raising pigs, feed, air, water, making sure their feed meets their nutrient requirements, that they have clean water available at all times, and that if you got outdoor production, that the temperature, your facilities are suited for the temperature. So if it's cold out, you got enough bedding. If it's hot out, you got enough shade and enough water to keep them comfortable.
That's great. Also, Verna, I don't know if you're working with the Mulefoot Breed Association. They would be an excellent resource if you're just starting out to find people in your area that might be able to mentor you, to help you find pigs and answer a lot of those husbandry type questions. Great question. Hi, Michael. Thanks for joining us today. We're glad you're here. Michael says, Mark, in terms of line breeding, do you have tips on identifying the heterozygous characteristics that we would want to continue? Inbreeding doesn't always transmit poor characteristics, right?
No, inbreeding doesn't always transmit bad things, but on average, inbreeding is going to hurt fertility of the animal, which when you're trying to maintain a population is tough. So in terms of trying to find individual genes, even the large commercial production isn't really looking at individual genes. So there's a lot of gene markers. And so basically what they're doing in commercial production is they're taking a 50K chip or a chip with 50,000 markers on it, and they're using it just to identify relationships between animals. So there's not a lot of looking at individual genes and selecting on individual genes done in the swine industry. So that's a good question. So in summary, like inbreeding isn't always bad, but on average, it's definitely going to reduce fertility, and people aren't necessarily looking at individual genes to make selections in the swine industry. Good question.
Great. Keep those questions coming. Type them on in. Charlene, did you have another question?
Yeah, and this is just a clarification question for me. You mentioned increasing generation interval. So you're not just waiting longer to breed, you're waiting for different litters of different ages to come together, right?
Right. No, that's a very good point. So you're going to keep breeding, but in theory, you would sell off the first 3 litters and then start keeping replacements out of the fourth litter. So if you had 5 or 10 sows and you had your parities staggered, all your sows were different ages, that you'd be able to do that, right? So, okay, Susie, she got to litter 4, so I'm going to keep some gilts out of her. You know, Molly, Mildred, they're still on litters 1 and 2, so I'm going to sell those gilts to other farmers or to market or whatnot. So good question.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful. And then, Brittany, would you mind posting the link to the Modern Heritage Swine Guide? That's one that Mark contributed a really, really nice chapter to on selecting broodstock and inbreeding and a lot of the information he's covered today. And that's actually free for download on our website. And it has lots of other info in it about raising heritage pigs. So check that out if you haven't seen it already. And thank you, Mark, for contributing.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And you can find that at livestockconservancy.org /heritage-swine /heritage-swine-guide. Or you can just go to livestockconservancy.org and go down to livestock, and there's a link under pigs. So that is all there.
Okay.
And all of the wonderful videos that Mark was talking about earlier from NC State Swine Extension are at swine.ces.ncsu.edu. So, that's their website. So you should definitely check that out. And I think YouTube was at NC State Swine Extension 7030 /videos. So definitely go watch those. They sound super helpful.
And then also they can, if they contact Bailey Arnold, her email is bestone@ncsu.edu. That's B as in boy, E as in elephant, stone @ncsu.edu. They can get added to the mailing list for our monthly newsletter. That's free. And a lot of times she puts a lot of niche type production information within the monthly newsletter. So
that sounds like an awesome resource. So y'all check it out. That'll be perfect. Mark, is there any other, I guess we've come to our shameless plug section of today. Is there anything else we should promote today for you?
I would say just for everybody, whether especially beginning farmers, like there's people out, it may seem a little overwhelming to find people at first, but there's people out there that can help you get started. Anytime you're starting in pig production, you just got to remember the very basics: feed, air, water, clean, available water, feed that meets the nutrient requirements, and making sure you're keeping those animals comfortable. And there's people out there such as myself to be happy to try and work with you to make sure you accomplish your goals. So.
Okay. Yeah, most states have extension offices, and I would think a lot might have swine specialists.
Well, the states with pigs definitely do, right? Like
okay.
Iowa, North Carolina, Missouri, Illinois, Nebraska. But if you get to some other states, they don't have as many pigs, don't have quite as many people. But
okay.
But most states do have at least one person.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
And I think, Charlene, you also wanted to plug Managing Breeds today.
That's right. Managing Breeds for a Secure Future is a publication. I think we're on the 3rd or 4th edition at this point, 3rd edition. Dr. Phil Spanenberg and Dr. Allison Martin and Jeanette Behringer contributed very, very heavily to the development of this. All of them are whizzes at managing breed genetics and understanding a lot more of the details of what Mark was mentioning earlier about, what is it that breeds take to survive, and how do we manage the genetics within the breed so that we don't lose genes, but also so that we don't perpetuate, bad genetics as well. It's a terrific resource. It is a little bit like a textbook. But if you're interested, it is a wonderful way to walk through the genetics of heritage breeds and breeding. Let's
Absolutely.
see, I think that was all from me.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Mark. This was amazing. I know I learned so much today. Your presentation was super helpful, and I think those videos and signups for the newsletter will be super helpful for other people raising pigs. So thank you so much for that. Charlene, thanks for joining us today to talk about some pigs. It's always fun to chat about them. Big thank you to ManaPro for sponsoring the chat today. We appreciate you. And thank you for everybody listening and sending in those wonderful questions. They were great. We really appreciate your engagement today. That was amazing. If you liked it, you enjoyed it, go ahead and share it after this is done so we can get the word out to other people that might be interested. And big thank you to all of our members. Thank you. Your support helps promote and do outreach like we're doing today. If you're not a member and you want to become a member, you can go to our website. That's livestockconservancy.org. And I think that's it. Am I forgetting anything, Charlene?
I don't believe so. I guess the only thing I would point out is that if you really are interested in getting into heritage pigs, you can go to our website at livestockconservancy.org. And there's a really nice breeders and products directory so that you can find the breed you want and in the area that would be closest to you. It's a good way to set up stock exchanges, so to speak. So to exchange animals if you have them, to get animals if you don't, and to find mentors who are close to you.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. Well, thank you again, everybody. We hope you have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll see you again next time. Bye.
Bye, everybody.